Great. All right. My name is Suzee. I'm an associate at GSV Asset Management. I work with Michael Moe over in Woodside. I'm also a professor at Northwestern University where I teach a class on entrepreneurship. I think a couple of my students are in the crowd, and it's great to have you here, so thanks for coming out. So before I preface this panel, I want to take a couple of minutes to talk about the trends we're seeing in digital health, especially as technology and healthcare merge to create what we call the digital doctor. So before we go and look in the future, I want to take a couple minutes to go back to the past and see how things have really changed. So it's ridiculous for us today to sit in our chairs and to think that our ancestors used to do things like bloodletting and use leeches and witchcraft to cure medical ailments. It's also probably equally more ridiculous to think that to treat coughs, we used to use heroin. To treat toothaches, we used to use cocaine. And drinking radium-laced water was thought to be as good for the body as drinking kale juice is today. And even more so, bike riders in the Tour de France, they used to smoke cigarettes because it was thought that smoking could enhance lung capacity. So a lot has changed since then. But fortunately for us, modern medicine, during the 1800s and 1900s really ushered in a new era of allowing us to understand health and wellness. So what it did was, we implemented public health measures. We discovered antibacterials, and we invented vaccines. So in the 1900s alone, we invented vaccines for the influenza, for hepatitis, against smallpox, chickenpox, and measles, which really helped us promote human longevity and help us live better and fuller lives. And you can really tell when you look at the population boom that really happened between the 1800s, 1900s, 2000s, and even in the future. So as Michael mentioned earlier this morning, the population in 1800 was barely at 1 billion. 1900 was 1.7 billion. But in the 2000s and even today, we're at 7.4 billion. And that's really much to the help of modern medicine. So a lot has changed, and we've improved a lot. But still, unfortunately for most people, your car mechanic knows more about your car than your doctor knows about your body. So if we're living in an era where you can code your personal genome through 23andMe for only $200, the future of medicine is going to get a lot more personal, a lot more digital, a lot more effective, and a lot more efficient as well. And if you look even more in the future, we're looking at trends in gene therapy, where there shows to be a lot of promise with technologies like CRISPR helping us edit our genes to prevent diseases. So in the future, we could actually be using something like 23andMe to detect anomalies in our genome, and then we can use technologies like CRISPR to actually edit out harmful genes so diseases don't propagate, which allows us to live, again, more healthy and fuller lives. And if that type of reality sounds really ridiculous, let's flash back to 1997 when the movie Gattaca came out. So when Gattaca first came out, which is now a cult classic, by the way, when it first came out, so Gattaca depicted a society that discriminated based on genetics. People were treated as superior if they had better genes. And this was actually a box office flop, as audiences around the world really failed to understand how the society could really exist. They failed to become enamored by this, and they were kind of turned off about it. And Gattaca did even more, and they ran ads in the Washington Post advertising for genetically made-to-order children. And even though this was a giant flop, funnily enough, people actually responded to this ad, and even thousands of people wanted to have their unborn children genetically altered. So now Gattaca came out in '97, and this was a really kind of different time. For context, Netscape was created in '94, which commercialized the internet. And Gattaca came out even 1 year before Google was born, which changed the way we search and changed the way we use the internet in our day-to-day lives. So what seemed like science fiction back then actually is probably science reality. And in fact, NASA actually named Gattaca as the most scientifically plausible film in 2011. So in an exponential future which we live in today, which Michael spoke about this morning, what really was unimaginable is probably possible. So with that, I'd like to bring up our panelists who will share their perspectives on digital health. How'd you get? How'd you sneak up on here? So first off, thank everyone for joining us. I know everyone's busy, so I really appreciate you taking the time. So before we get started, I'd like everyone to take a minute to introduce themselves and talk about their company and what they do, just in a quick 3-sentence type deal.
Great, I'll start. My name is Bronwyn Harris. I have a background in biomed engineering, and I'm a trained physician in pediatric cardiology, and did the Stanford Biodesign program. And from that program, our company Tueo Health was born. And we are reimagining the way we care for chronic diseases that don't have good measures of control, that are primarily symptom-based. So initially focusing on asthma, we're able to use data from sleep sensors, including physiologic data, to provide an assessment. When we realize changes, we then have a whole service wrapped around it to help the families better manage their asthma.
I'm Elli Kaplan. I am the CEO and co-founder of Neurotrack. We are bringing to market the first commercially available digital platform to be able to identify people who are at risk for cognitive decline using eye tracking, so to non-invasively, in a passive way, be able to understand whether you have hippocampal impairment, which leads to mild cognitive impairment and then ultimately Alzheimer's disease, and a digital therapeutic that we pair with it that is scientifically validated to prevent cognitive decline and memory loss.
Hi, I'm Dirk Schapeler. I'm working for Bayer, and I just saw you had one of our previous products there up on the screen. Bayer didn't invent heroin, but synthesized it. Actually, the same guy who invented aspirin. So Bayer is today three business units, one in pharmaceuticals, one in consumer health, over-the-counter products, and then we have a crop science unit who is about to get much bigger due to the acquisition of Monsanto. We have products in the digital health space that are, somewhat adjacent to our traditional products, but mainly today we have brands like Claritin, Coppertone sun cream, all the way to prescription drugs in cancer, women's health, and cardiovascular. I'm running our digital innovation team, which is based in Mountain View. It's a small team of about 10 people, and we have sister teams in Shanghai, Tel Aviv, and Singapore, and Berlin, of course. And we are looking at everything that does not involve a molecule or biotech. So anything related to a sensor, to machine learning, to the way of monetizing data related to health.
Ram Fish. I guess I'm mentally ill because I'm running my third startup now, so serial entrepreneur by definition. Spent some time at Apple, led digital health at Samsung, and about 2.5 years ago, decided to reincarnate Florence Nightingale, and we created a family of products we call GALE, which is a health hub. It's a center for healthcare, bringing together all the amazing innovation in terms of AI, in terms of diagnostic devices, in terms of services, to create a health hub that an employer can deploy, that you can put in a community center, that you can put in a nursing facility, and still do it together with the healthcare industry, not replacing it. So it's a B2B SaaS business that we have been building in the last 2.5 years.
So I guess what's true and fundamentally is that a lot of change has occurred in the past couple of years. So I'm curious to hear about what everyone's perspective is on how healthcare will continue to evolve. So Bronwyn, for example, you actually have an MD, but you didn't choose to practice, and now you are running your own startup. What's the future of healthcare, and especially the doctor profession, and kind of why did you choose to focus on Tueo Health?
So I do practice just a little bit, do a half day a week in general pediatric cardiology clinic, so haven't totally given that up. But what I do feel is there's a lot of data out there, and as you were describing, the physicians don't know that much about your body. When you come into the clinic, they can listen at that moment in time. They can ask questions about how you've been feeling before that, but there's a huge opportunity to really understand on a continual basis what we have wearables, we have sleep sensors, how do we use that data? Now, I don't think data isn't the magic cure. You can't just have more data and therefore you have the answer. And I think, we're at this place where there is data, but we don't know how to use it in clinical care. When I have a patient who tells me about their Fitbit heart rate data, I don't know what to do with that. I don't know, does that actually mean I could skip getting a Holter monitor? Right now, I don't think so, but can we get to that point? And how do we get there? And so that's part of what we're doing at Tueo, is figuring out how to take this data, how to make it have specific insights about a clinical disease, and then have actionable next steps, because it doesn't really matter if you know something more about someone's state if there isn't something you can do about it. And then how do you engage them so they actually do that to change outcomes? And so, I think that's where we're going, and that's where we need to figure out, how do you do each step along the way? Data collection to clinical insights to actionable outcomes to changing clinical status.
Elli, what about you?
Well, I think building on what Bronwyn said, what we're learning is that that people are seeking and accessing care in lots of different places than they ever have been before, and finding out and gathering data on themselves in lots of different ways than they have before. And yet, traditional healthcare is not changing. So, the stakeholders that exist today, hospital systems, academic medical centers, payers, providers, there's very little change that is actually happening within those institutions. And yet we have this massive amount of data and information and insight that the traditional healthcare system could benefit from enormously. And I think what we're going to see in the next sort of 2 to 7 years, big span, is, I hope, in really innovative and novel ways in which traditional healthcare is almost forced by the patient, the consumer, to figure out new ways of interacting with this data and these burgeoning new stakeholders in the system, whether it's through startups or digital platforms at large pharmaceutical companies or elsewhere. And what I hope is that the result of that is actually improved outcomes and, in some form or format, lowered costs. But I think there's a lot that we still don't know and is yet to be seen, and that it's going to take some flexibility and innovation to really make it all happen.
So Dirk, from your perspective at Bayer, how have you seen the focuses of large corporations shift in the digital era?
Yeah, basically also to build on what Elli was saying, we would like to get to a point where we actually allow the patient to know what a drug in their body does to them. Today you have this phenomenon that, okay, you validate a drug, takes you billions to develop it, and then you statistically validate how much, how many milligrams they need to take per person, and everybody gets the same amount. But we know all that we are all different, even if it's sometimes only smaller differences. But overall, I'm quite excited about this whole personalized medicine piece. And that in combination with sensors that allow you to actually take a drug, then see how it impacts your body, and by means of that, see whether it's actually efficient and whether it even is working for you at all. I'm not sure how many people know that, but there's, in some drugs, there's like a double-digit percentage of drugs that just do not work for certain people. And today you just sell everybody the drug, okay, and then hope it works. If it doesn't work, you go to the doctor again and you take the next one. I hope that we can get away from that kind of a way of acting towards something that is also outcome-based. And also to already reply to the elephant in the room, there are already the first drugs in the area of oncology, where the companies provide the drug for free, and only if it proves to be efficient for the patient, then they get paid, which is right, because they did all the work, they put all the work in there. But if it doesn't work, you don't get to pay for it. And I think that's where we are heading in the near future for some drugs, and for some others it might take a little bit longer because you cannot measure every impact of a drug that easily.
Well, if I could just add one thing, I think what's to me important is that when you say that you're going to make it possible for people to really know what's in their drugs and how they affect them, I would imagine that that's part market pull and market push, from the standpoint that patients and consumers have access to so much more information about their health, their bodies, what's in the market. And so if you don't do that, someone else will, and you'll lose those patients.
Exactly.
And so I think that what we're going to be able to see is that patients have a much louder voice and can advocate and make changes in the system in ways that they never have been before.
Yeah, absolutely. I fully agree with that. And, you know, we also, it's not like we don't want to do all these things, but we have been held back a lot more in the past. But just these last 2-3 years, we have seen an enormous effort from the authorities, you know, the FDA approaching us, asking us to participate in working groups and asking us, how should we change the regulations so that you guys can actually use these new technologies, but still make sure that everybody's safe doing that. But there is a lot of change coming along, and I'm actually quite positive about that.
So Ram, you've had experience at startups now and also at corporations. With your company and your experience building it, what's the harshest reality about building a company in healthcare that most people don't realize?
Healthcare takes time, and healthcare is an extremely complicated industry, not necessarily rational, with a money flow that is flowing through multiple channels. One of the best stories I heard was that we all used in Silicon Valley to go into a customer meeting, pitch to the customer. You can see the brightness in their eyes. They all get excited. And you finish the meeting, says, when should we follow up? And in the technology sector, they will look at you and says, I think we have some time next Wednesday. You go to the healthcare industry and a healthcare provider, and you go and you pitch to them. And first of all, there is a large group because it's all consensus driven. And you see their eyes are bright, like they're excited. And you finish the meeting and says, okay, when can we follow up? And they open the calendar and says, we think probably in about 8 weeks. And if you're coming from technology industry and you don't realize it, you basically go, says, screw them, I'm going to go away, they're not serious, like I don't want to deal with those guys. But that's how healthcare moves. It's a different pace. And once you realize it and realize the dynamics of the industry, I think there are great opportunities in it. But realizing the incentives, the complexity, both the human complexity around healthcare, and if any of you have not read any of Dan Ariely or Cass Sunstein books, highly recommend them. And then you go into the whole monetization and compensation and what's the government paying, what's the employer paying. It's radically different and complicated industry. A very rewarding industry, but a very complicated one.
So what do you think are the most untapped areas of highest untapped potential in digital health? And on the flip side, what do you think is most overhyped and kind of overemphasized and farther from commercialization? So maybe I'll start with you, Bronwyn.
Sure. So let's see. I think in terms of what I think is overhyped, and this isn't maybe a specific area, but the idea of let's flip healthcare on its head, and let's completely change everything. And I think there are a fair amount of variety of companies saying that, and at least the clinician in me cringes that you can be transformative, absolutely, and that's what we should be striving to do, but you have to work with the health system and the way things are. And I think maybe we will eventually flip it on its head, but it's going to be sort of 1 degree turn at a time. And so making sure that you're aware of all of those challenges, of all of the stakeholders, and not thinking you can just cut ones out of it. In terms of what I think great potential, I think whatever sector we're in, we're biased towards, which is good. allows me to wake up each day excited, but I really am excited about how do we use sensors? How do we use data that isn't thought of as clinical data right now? Everything from, what's the air quality in your home, to your heart rate, to your movement, and how do we put that together to actually understand how an individual's doing and have it tie into whether it's chronic disease management or, knowing when someone's sick or not, or even, their routine checkup, having that type of data. So I think that the sensors are already there, the data's there, but the translation piece is, what's coming.
What about you, Elli?
I think in terms of where there's opportunity, it's in access to care and serving underserved communities who have traditionally had very, very poor health care and very little access to health care. And I think the real opportunity in digital health is the fact that a lot of it is delivered through smartphones. And even in those very poor communities, a lot of people have smartphones. And so if we can figure out payment models that work out for both ends, and granted, that's an easy thing to say and a very difficult thing to do, then I think there's enormous opportunity. When we were first kind of testing our B2C platform with our eye tracking test, we made the test available for free. We ran some ads in the U.S. in the U.S. and in a few other English-speaking countries. It was a really kind of on a lark type of experiment. And in 3 months' time, we had 100,000 people sign up from more than 165 countries, places that I had never even heard of before. We had big pockets all over Africa, in Easter Island, in Polynesia, and that to me is the value of digital health. And I think that's if you can figure out how to make a market of that, then you'll change the world and you will dramatically improve healthcare. And then in terms of what I think is overhyped, I think it's selling to employers. I think that a lot of people think in the digital health space that employers are the solution and they've got deep pockets, and I think it's becoming more and more crowded and more difficult to sell to, and I think it's a Band-Aid solution to real ways to monetize healthcare, and I think we got to look for something else.
What about you, Dirk? Where are huge areas of potential and what's overhyped?
So I'm going to pick the same one for both, and I'll tell you why. So when you look at machine learning, deep learning, there's I haven't been to a pitching event recently where there wasn't a single company that was saying, oh, we are in AI, and most of them are in AI and in blockchain, and not for the good reasons. So, but there's a lot of hype around it. And what we discovered when we were working on quite a large variety of different applications of these technologies, we saw that the most difficult part is really around capturing the data, cleaning up the data, and then having access to the data and having even the right to use the data. To give you an example, we have, the company is 150 years old. We have gazillions of data points from patient data that we recorded during clinical trials, but we're not allowed to use them for other purposes than what was put into the patient consent. So all these issues, they are kind of brushed under the carpet, and nobody really talks about it openly. And everybody tells you just take this machine learning tool and work with us, and and then everything's going to magically evolve, and there's going to be a solution. So I think right now, that issue still needs to be resolved. And the more sensors, on the other hand, that we have, the more access we have to data, the more people record data and also share it. People are more and more open to do that. The more you can actually use these technologies in order to develop healthcare tools, not only drugs, treatments in general, more quickly and more efficiently.
So I'll start with what's overhyped. On a panel on digital health, I'll say the first thing that's overhyped is digital health. Because I don't give a damn if health is digital or not digital. What we care about is the consumer and the patient. And I'm intentionally intertwining those two words. And I'll try to be a bit more provocative. We've talked about transformation of healthcare. And I'll argue that the transformation of the healthcare industry is not going to happen in the healthcare industry. But the wording here is very careful. What I mean by that is the transformation is going to happen. It's actually happening. But it's happening physically outside of the traditional walls of the hospital or the healthcare industry. It's moving outside into employers, it's moving into community workers, it's moving into the patient homes. We talked about the trend of empowering patients, the ability to do more as a patient, understand more, get access to more information. So the transformation is not going to happen in the existing established industry with ways of doing, process, existing incumbents, all of them overconfident in the ways they do things and move really slowly. But it's going to be happening as the existing healthcare industry starts serving more and more places physically outside. That's when they will need new technologies, they will need new vendors, there will be new ways to pay and compensate for their healthcare services. One of the amazing statistics I just heard was that AMR, American Medical Response, estimated that you can save $700 billion by using treatment in place. So if you move more and more of the diagnostics and treatment outside of the existing healthcare physical setup, there's a huge opportunity to save. There are less power to the existing players, and there's much more opportunity for new technologies. I disagree with Elli about the role of employers, because I think the employers are the ones that a lot of the money in the industry is coming from, and when there is a strong incentive. Yes, right now there is a very long line in front of every employer with overhyped AI solutions. But if we look at the industry, they are the ones that have the incentive and relative ability to move faster than the government or the existing healthcare industry.
Yeah, I don't disagree with that at all. All I'm saying is that I think a lot of these digital health companies, rather than really understanding, the employer becomes sort of the fail-safe for monetizing, and I think there are very few that will be successful at that, and so there's going to be some weeding out of companies as a result of the fact that lots and lots believe that this is how they're going to make money on it.
I just want to add one thing around data, because we keep on hearing the term big data and data being thrown around. And I think it's important to put some structure into it, because it also helps understand the way the industry will move. There are three types of big data we are dealing with. There is the disease data, which is what the healthcare industry knows today. Huge amounts of data, who got sick, how did we treat it, how did it progress over time. Great. That's extremely valuable. You can apply AI to it. That's the foundation. On top of it, we have what I would call activity data, what we can track and understand about the people. A lot of it is coming from different types of sensors. Being able to know when you went to sleep, what was your heart rate, what was your heart rate variability, how did it change through the day. That's what the Fitbit, the Apple, those guys have. And if you want to personalize medicine, if you want to understand how your treatment is working, it's extremely valuable. And by the way, this data is not where the healthcare industry is. It belongs to a completely different set of companies, and it involves physical way of tracking the data, i.e. capital costs. The third type of data is your behavioral data, the personality. And that's a really important part of treatment that traditionally, you'll ask a little bit about the patient, and the doctor might observe a little bit and kind of figure it out. But understanding the personality type, the willpower, what stage the patient is in his willingness to actually fight the disease. This is, again, that's data that's not available for the healthcare industry, but it's data that Amazon has, and data that Facebook has, and data that Apple has. So the potential of those players who know technology, can move fast, have both the activity data and the behavioral data to understand how to treat you And by the way, they can license the disease data from the healthcare industry because all of those are slow-moving, most of them non-profit, and for the right deal, they will license the disease data. The potential of the Amazon and the Apples to change the industry is very significant.
So with 30 seconds left, I'd like everyone to talk about or to explain their big prediction in the future of health in one sentence. So who wants to volunteer first?
Our picture of the future of health in one sentence?
Your prediction, future of health in one sentence.
No pressure.
Well, I go first, and otherwise, now time is up. Okay.
Okay. Well done.
I believe that quantum computing will really be the next big revolution. I'm not sure whether it's going to come in 5 years or in 15, but the fact that you can actually really almost simulate using an endless amount of data in no time, that's going to be huge.
I'll take one more guinea pig. I'll also volunteer.
And so I believe that instead of intermittent, somewhat arbitrary visits to your physician, that you'll be able to have real-time information from data that helps you know when you should be seeking care and what's going on in between those arbitrary intermittent visits.
Awesome. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thanks.